The sky over the transit hub wasn't really a sky anymore. It was just a thick, suffocating slab of bruised charcoal, weeping a cold, needle-like rain that tasted of diesel and wet ash. They called this place the graveyard. It was a bombed-out bus terminal 3 clicks behind the forward line, a place where the living waited for trucks and the dead waited for helicopters. I stood by the rusted skeleton of a ticket booth, my boots sinking into a slurry of mud and pulverized concrete. My left hand was doing that thing again, the rhythmic, uncontrollable twitching that started after the mortar strike in Sector 4. I shoved it deep into the pocket of my OCP trousers, feeling the cold metal of my dog tags press against my thigh. My M4 was slung across my chest, the weight of it familiar and hateful. The rattle can paint job was chipped to hell, showing the naked black aluminum underneath, and the tactical light was held on by layers of grime-caked duct tape. I felt like that rifle. Functional, barely, but the finish had been stripped away a long time ago. The sound of the front never really stops. It's a low-frequency thud that you feel in your molars more than you hear in your ears. Thump, thump, the heartbeat of the beast. Out here, silence is the thing that scares you. Silence means they're relaying the coordinates. Silence means the next one is coming for you. Then I heard it, a different kind of thunder. The grinding gears and turbo whine of an LMTV struggling through the muck. The truck rounded the corner of a collapsed pharmacy, its blackout lights casting dim, ghostly beams through the fog. It groaned to a halt, venting a cloud of hot, acrid exhaust that mixed with the freezing rain. Before the driver could even cut the engine, she was out. Stacy, my angel. She didn't jump out like they do in the recruitment videos. She hopped down with the practiced, heavy movements of someone carrying 60 pounds of medical gear and the weight of every soul she couldn't save. Her uniform was a shade darker than mine, soaked through and stained with the copper smell of old blood and the gray dust of the ruins. I didn't move at first. I couldn't. I just watched her adjust the tourniquet pouch on her chest, the one she kept high so she could reach it with either hand while pinned down. Her hair was a mess, pulled back into a knot so tight it looked painful, and I could see the streaks of silver at her temples. She was 27, but in this light, under this sky, she looked ancient. We didn't run, we didn't scream each other's names. We just walked toward each other through the mud, 2 ghosts meeting in the middle of a bad dream. When we finally reached one another, the first thing I felt wasn't her skin. It was the violent metallic clack of our ceramic plate carriers hitting each other. It was the sound of war getting in the way of a hug. We were 2 armored boxes trying to find the people inside. I reached up, my shaking hand finally finding its purpose, and cupped the back of her neck. Her skin was freezing, slick with rain, but her breath was a hot, ragged puff against my chin. We didn't kiss, not yet. We just pressed our foreheads together, eyes closed, leaning into the contact. I could smell her. It wasn't perfume. It was the scent of Sanaskin wipes, stale coffee, and the faint, lingering ozone of a discharged weapon. To me, it was the best thing in the world. It was the smell of being alive. "Buddy," she whispered. Her voice was a rasp, a dry scrape of vocal cords worn thin by shouting over gunfire and coughing on cordite. "I got you, Angel," I muttered back, my own voice sounding like boots on gravel. "I got you. We have 48 hours. The world doesn't exist for 48 hours. She pulled back just an inch, her eyes, the medic's stare, drilling into mine. They were bloodshot, searching for injuries, checking my pupils, looking for the trauma before she looked for the man. That was her curse. She couldn't stop being a medic any more than I could stop being a target. She saw the tremor in my hand. She saw the new scar on my jaw. But she didn't say a word. She just reached down and interlaced her fingers with mine, squeezing hard enough to stop the shaking. Behind us, the LMTV roared and pulled away, leaving us alone in the rain. The artillery thudded again, closer this time, a reminder that the clock was already ticking. Every second we stood here was a second stolen from the end. "Let's go," I said, nodding toward the ruins of the hotel down the street, "before the sky falls in." We turned and walked together, shoulder to shoulder, our gear clinking in a rhythmic martial song. 48 hours. In this life, that was a lifetime. In this war, it was a heartbeat. The hotel was called the Grand Horizon, a name that felt like a cruel joke now. The lobby was a graveyard of crystal chandeliers and velvet curtains, all buried under a foot of pulverized plaster. We didn't stay on the ground floor. Too many sight lines for a stray drone or a desperate scavenger. We climbed the service stairs to a room on the third floor that still had 3.5 walls. The door groaned on its hinges as I kicked it shut and slid the deadbolt. It wouldn't stop a breach team, but it would buy us the 3 seconds we needed to reach for our rifles. That was the reality. Even here, in our sanctuary, we were calculating kill zones. Then came the ritual, the stripping of the iron skin. I watched Stacy drop her medical ruck. It hit the floor with a heavy metallic thud, the sound of 60 pounds of trauma shears, chest seals, and morphine. She reached for the quick-release buckles on her plate carrier. Schlick, schlick. The Velcro tore through the silence like a gunshot. When the vest came off, she didn't look relieved. She looked smaller, fragile. Her OCP shirt was soaked with sweat in the shape of the ceramic plates, a dark map of where she'd been carrying the weight of the world. I followed suit. I unslung the M4, clearing the chamber and setting it on the bedside table, muzzle toward the door, safety on. I peeled off my own kit. The moment the weight left my shoulders, my spine felt like it was gonna snap. It's a strange thing, the way your body holds itself together when you're under the load. The moment you let go, everything starts to scream. She sat on the edge of a mattress that smelled of mildew and old dust. I sat across from her on a wooden chair that creaked under my weight. For a long minute, we just sat there, listening to the wind howl through the jagged hole where the window used to be. "Let me see," she said. Her voice was softer now, the angel coming out. I didn't have to ask what she meant. I pulled my shirt over my head. The room was freezing, but I didn't feel the cold. I felt her eyes. She reached out, her fingers tracing the jagged purple line of the shrapnel scar on my jaw, then moving down to the puckered skin on my shoulder. Her touch was light, clinical, but tender. "You're lucky, buddy," she whispered, her thumb hovering over the scar. 3 inches to the left, and I'd be writing a letter to your mother. "Luck is the only thing I have left in my inventory, Stacy," I said, catching her hand. I looked down at her forearms. The sleeves of her combat shirt were rolled up, revealing the chemical burns from the IED she survived last winter. The skin was mottled, a patchwork of red and pale white. I didn't say anything. I just leaned forward and pressed my lips to the scarred skin of her wrist. She shivered, but she didn't pull away.
She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, dented tin. I managed to scrounge some real coffee, not the MRE battery acid. Real beans, pre-ground. It was a small thing, a pathetic thing, But in that room, with the artillery shaking the floorboards every few minutes, we sat on the floor, huddled around the tiny heat source, waiting for the water to boil in a blackened tin cup. We didn't talk about the long walk or the casualties in Sector 7. We talked about the golden retriever she wanted to get when this was over. We talked about the way the light hits the Appalachian Trail in October. We told lies about the future because the present was too heavy to carry. She pulled the silver ring from under her shirt, the one hanging on the paracord. She didn't put it on her finger. Her knuckles were too swollen from the cold and the work for it to fit anymore. She just held it between us, the silver catching the blue light of the stove. "I still have it," she said, her voice cracking just a little. "I know," I replied. I reached out and took the cup, the steam hitting my face, smelling of a world that didn't have cordite in it. For those few minutes, the war felt like a movie someone else was watching. The tremor in my hand calmed down. The stare in her eyes softened. We weren't Sergeant Camber and Sergeant Keitke. We were just Smith and Stacy, two kids hiding in a ruin, trying to remember what it felt like to be warm. I reached over and blew out the small flame. The room plunged into a deep tobacco-colored twilight. "Sleep," I said, pulling her toward the mattress. "I'll take the first watch." "No," she murmured, pulling me down beside her. "No watches. Not tonight. If the world ends, let it end while we're actually dreaming." I laid my head back, my hand instinctively reaching for the pistol under the pillow, but my other hand was locked in hers. And for the first time in 300 days, the thud of the artillery didn't sound like a threat. It sounded like a lullaby.
The dream was thin. It was a fragile thing made of silence and the warmth of Stacy's breath against my collarbone. But in the graveyard, dreams don't die natural deaths. They get executed. The sound that did it was the low electronic chirp of a handheld radio, a PRC 152. It wasn't loud, but to a soldier's ears, it was a scream. I was awake before my brain even processed the noise. My hand didn't go for the light, it went for the M4 on the nightstand. I had a round chambered and the safety off before I realized I was still in a hotel room and not a fighting hole. Stacy was already sitting up, her eyes wide and dark, reflecting the gray pre-dawn light leaking through the ruins. She didn't ask, "What's that?" She just started reaching for her boots. The radio chirped again, 2 short bursts, the "I'm here" signal from a runner. I stood up, my joints popping like small arms fire. I felt the cold air hit my bare chest, but I didn't care. I walked to the window and looked down into the street. A lone figure was standing in the shadows of the motor pool, the red glow of a cigarette the only thing marking his position. He tapped his radio twice more. "Company's moving," I said. My voice was back to the gravel grind. The buddy Camber who liked golden retrievers and October hikes was gone. He'd been packed away in a rucksack. "How much time did we lose?" Stacy asked. She was already pulling her hair back into that tight, brutal knot. 12 hours, maybe 14, I replied, checking my watch. 04:15. The leave was supposed to last until 1800. In this war, a schedule is just a list of things that won't happen. We didn't complain, we didn't curse the CO or the war, we just moved. It was a different kind of dance than the night before. This was the ritual of the load. I pulled on my OCP shirt, the fabric stiff with dried salt and grime. I hoisted the plate carrier, the 30 pounds of ceramic and steel settling onto my shoulders like an old, hateful friend. I felt the weight anchor me back to the earth, back to the mission. I watched Stacy do the same. She was Angel again. She was checking the seals on her trauma kit, her movements surgical and fast, her face a mask of cold concentration. The Angel's stare was back, sharper than ever.
I grabbed a spare magazine from my kit, checked the seating of the top round, and slid it into the well of my rifle. Clack, clack, the sound of reality. "Buddy," she said, stopping me as I reached for my helmet. I turned. She wasn't looking at me like a lover. She was looking at me like a squad leader looks at a casualty he's about to receive. She reached out and adjusted the strap on my shoulder, pulling it tight. "Radio frequency is 54.25, she said. Her voice was flat, professional. "If you hit the shit, stay on the net. I'm with the 2nd Battalion Med Station. We're trailing your push." "I know the drill, Angel," I said. I reached out and squeezed her arm, not her hand, but the heavy fabric of her sleeve. It was a soldier's touch, a stay alert touch. "Don't get heroic," she added, her eyes burning into mine for a split second. "I'm tired of stitching up heroes. They're too hard to put back together." "I'm no hero," I muttered, sliding my helmet on and buckling the chin strap. The world narrowed down to the view through the NVG mount. "I'm just a guy trying to get to the next 48. I walked to the door and checked the hallway. The silence of the hotel was gone, replaced by the distant, rhythmic growl of diesel engines warming up in the motor pool. The beast was hungry again. We left the room without looking back. Looking back is for people who expect to return. We just descended the stairs, our gear clinking, our boots heavy on the rubble. As we hit the lobby, the first thud of the morning's preparatory fire rolled across the city. It wasn't the distant heartbeat anymore, it was a roar. The sky was turning a sickly, bruised purple, and the rain had turned to a fine, freezing mist. The short fuse had burned out. The explosion was coming.
The motor pool was a choir of idling diesel engines and the rhythmic clanking of steel on steel. A thick, oily fog had rolled in from the river, hugging the ground and mixing with the exhaust fumes until the world felt like it was made of poison and gray wool. This was the staging area, the place where the Army gathered its strength before screaming into the void. Stacy and I stood by the tailboard of an LMTV, the truck's engine vibrating through the soles of our boots. Around us, the chaos of a unit spinning up was in full swing. Sergeants were barking orders, men were tossing crates of ammo into truck beds, and the metallic clink, clink, clink of belt-fed rounds being loaded was the only music we had. We didn't look at each other, not directly. If I looked at her for too long, I knew I'd lose my edge. I could feel the buddy camber who loved her trying to claw his way out, but the squad leader camber held the door shut. I reached into my pocket and felt the cold, brushed steel of my Zippo. It was a heavy, reliable piece of metal that had survived 3 deployments and a dozen firefights. I pulled it out and held it in my palm. "Hey," I said, my voice barely cutting through the rumble of the trucks. Stacy turned. Her face was pale, her eyes shadowed by the brim of her Kevlar helmet. She looked like a statue carved from salt and fatigue. I held out the lighter. "Take this. The flint's new. It'll light in a hurricane." She looked at the Zippo, then at me. She didn't say thanks. In this world, thanks is a word for people who still have manners. She just reached out and took it, her gloved fingers brushing mine. For a second, that small contact was the only thing holding me to the earth. "You giving me your luck, buddy?" she asked, a ghost of a smile flickering on her lips before vanishing back into the gray. "I'm giving you a way to stay warm," I replied. "Luck is for the guys who don't have a plan. You stay behind the armor. You wait for the clear before you move to the casualty. You hear me?" "I hear you, Sergeant," her voice turning professional. "I'll be at the med station. If your chalk takes a hit, look for the green smoke. That'll be me." "Mount up!" a voice roared from the front of the column. The spell broke. The 48 hours weren't just over. They felt like they had happened to 2 other people in a different life. Stacy stepped toward her vehicle, a heavy Humvee with a red cross painted on the door. She moved with the weight of her medical ruck, her silhouette disappearing into the swirling exhaust and fog. She didn't look back. She knew the rules. Looking back is how you get distracted, and distraction is how you get killed. I climbed into the back of my LMTV, grabbing the overhead rail. My squad was already there, 10 men, faces smeared with camo paint, eyes staring at the floorboards. They looked like ghosts in OCP. I took my place at the end of the bench, my M4 resting between my knees. The truck jolted forward, the gears screaming as it found traction in the mud. As we pulled out of the terminal, I saw her vehicle pull into the line 3 trucks back. The red cross was a jagged, bloody mark against the gray horizon. I reached up and touched the empty spot in my pocket where the Zippo used to be. The cold air rushed into the back of the truck, smelling of the front, that mix of wet earth, burnt rubber, and distant cordite. The gray horizon swallowed us whole. There were no more words, just the vibration of the truck and the steady, rhythmic tremor in my left hand that had returned the moment she let go.
The 2nd Battalion med station didn't smell like a hospital. It smelled like a slaughterhouse that had been sprayed down with industrial-grade bleach. The air was a thick, humid soup of iron, sweat, and the acrid smoke of cauterizing units. Outside, the world was a cacophony of whistling incoming rounds and the rhythmic, chest-thumping whop-whop-whop of Blackhawks flaring for landing. I was up to my elbows in it. My gloves, once translucent blue, were now a slick, dark crimson. I was working on a 19-year-old kid with a chest wound that sounded like a broken bellows. Suck, wheeze, suck. I didn't know his name. Out here, names were a luxury. He was just a Priority 1 casualty with a mounting debt to the universe. "Easy, kid," I hissed, my voice a jagged rasp from shouting over the generators. "Stay with me. Don't you dare close those eyes." In the corner of the tent, the tactical radio, the one patched into the infantry net, was a constant buzzing parasite. It was the background noise of my life. Usually I could tune it out, filtering for keywords like missed report or 9-line. But then the frequency cleared. The static dropped away for a heartbeat, and a voice cut through the chaos like a cold blade. "Contact! Contact! Break, break! This is Camber 1-6. We are taking heavy fire from the tree line. 3 KIA, 4 WIA. We are pinned in the draw." My heart didn't skip a beat. It stopped. I knew that voice. It was the gravel grind. It was Buddy. But it wasn't the man who had held me in the dark 12 hours ago. This was a man shouting from the bottom of a grave. In the background of his transmission, I could hear the rhythmic, terrifying thump, thump, thump of a 50 cal and the chaotic, high-pitched snap, hiss of rounds passing close to the microphone. "Angel, pressure on the femoral!" a voice barked at me. I didn't move. I was staring at the radio. "Camber 1-6 to Overwatch. We need immediate suppressive fire on grid 790. They're overrunning the left flank. Where is my air support?" Buddy's voice was climbing in pitch. Not out of fear, Buddy didn't do fear, but out of the raw physical exertion of fighting for every inch of air. I could hear him coughing, that dry cordite cough I knew so well. I reached into my pocket, my bloody gloves smearing the fabric of my trousers. I felt the hard, rectangular shape of the Zippo he'd given me. I squeezed it until the metal edges bit into my palm. "Focus, Stacy. Focus. This is 1-6. We're blowing the claymores. If anyone is reading this, tell the med station. Tell Angel." The radio exploded into a wall of white noise, a massive crump. The sound of an explosion close enough to melt the electronics swallowed his words. Then, the most terrifying sound in the world, the open mic hiss of a radio with no one left to talk into it. "Buddy?" I whispered, the word lost in the roar of a departing helicopter. I dropped the gauze. I didn't care about the kid on the table. I didn't care about the Angel protocol. I lunged for the radio handset, my hand shaking so violently I almost dropped it. "Camber 1-6, this is Med Station. Smith, do you copy? Smith, talk to me." Static, a long, agonizing stretch of empty air. Then, a faint, rhythmic sound began to bleed through the interference. It wasn't a voice. It was the slow, mechanical beep, beep, beep of a heart monitor from somewhere else in the tent, mixing with the distant, dying echoes of the firefight over the airwaves. I stood there, the handset pressed to my ear, the cold rain of the morning finally finding its way through the tent's seams. I flicked the Zippo. Click, hiss. The small, defiant flame danced in the gloom, casting a warm tobacco light on my blood-stained hands. "You promised," I whispered into the static. "You promised the world wouldn't exist for 48 hours. The radio gave one final dying crackle, a burst of distorted audio that might have been a name, or might just have been the wind howling through a broken antenna. Then the line went dead. The sky outside had turned from bruised charcoal to a flat, lifeless gray. The 48 hours were gone. The heartbeat of the front continued. Thump, thump, thump. But the rhythm had changed. The silence between the shells was no longer a reprieve. It was a question with no answer. I closed the Zippo. Clack. The screen fades to black. The only sound left is the steady, haunting hiss of an unassigned radio frequency.
This concludes today's entry in the War Tape Files. History is written in the records we leave behind. To help us preserve more of these stories, subscribe and join our archive. Thank you for watching.